What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to another BC Lions preview video. Coming at you guys for week number 3, the rematch between the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and BC Lions this week in BC Place out west. As you guys should be used to, coming at you guys solo once again. Unfortunately, Blake not able to join me tonight, but up to our usual scheduled programming, the preview videos you guys have been used to the last few weeks. I'm going to be giving you guys initial thoughts, injury reports, going through the matchups, offense versus defense. The only changes this week will be there won't be a guest from the Winnipeg Blue Bomber side of things. Going to talk some more lines tonight, and yeah. So before we get into the video, of course, can you guys like the video? Most importantly, comment down below, and of course, subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys will get notified every single time we go live or upload any sort of content on the channel, as well as follow us on our social media platforms at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram, at underscore CF Fanatics on Twitter or X as well. Folks, the rematch is a few days away. 2 days away. Winnipeg taking on the BC Lions once again after the Winnipeg Blue Bombers got the better of the BC Lions. And, the BC Lions, Thursday matchup was the last, was when these two teams played last. And as I talked about a few times, they kind of go into that mini bye. The Lions with a big time sour taste in their mouth, going in there with a loss, a pretty, um, a really statement win, I would think, kind of for Winnipeg Blue Bombers fans and that team of a lot of fans, media, kind of wondering how this Winnipeg Blue Bombers team was going to kind of come out of the gates here after losing, for the third straight time in the Grey Cup. They come out with a very impressive win without their starting quarterback, without their starting running back after the first series of the game. And they look to, up to the standard as usual, running the rock as they are accustomed to doing, throwing the ball downfield when they're able to, playing that really stiffening defense as well. Business as usual for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and it was a very disappointing outing and effort for the BC Lions last week. They get to go and right their wrong, or get the opportunity to right their wrong this upcoming Saturday in the rematch. But it'll be interesting to see, especially when it comes to the season series being on the line here, right? When these two teams don't play each other again, they only played each other twice in the regular season. So it will be an interesting one. Of course, losing the season series isn't, the sky isn't falling per se, but it is going to be a tough thing when it comes to playoff time. And I think how tight the West will be, things like that will definitely come into play. Whether or not maybe we're going on the road, who knows what could be happening. Whether it could be come down to even who gets in the playoffs. You know, who knows what could happen in 19 weeks time. So um, other than that, initial thoughts, obviously the elephant in the room, the status of Nathan Rourke, right? With I know being labeled as of now as questionable for the game, 2 DNPs in a row. We'll talk about it a little bit when we get into the injury report, but we'll see what happens there. And obviously, if he doesn't, it looks like it's going to be Jeremiah Masoli's show. So it should be an interesting one to keep an eye on as well. I plan on being down there pretty early, so hoping to get my eyes on Nathan Rourke, seeing if he's throwing it all, seeing how he's looking down there, and we'll get hopefully you guys some updates. As I said, make sure you guys are following our social media platforms, especially our Twitter on game day gets a little bit more active, and you guys will be able to stay in touch as best as possible. So, shout out to Nathan Rourke is definitely a big one. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Of course, when talking about the quarterbacks, you have to mention the return of one Zach Collaros being activated once again after serving his suspension. Um, don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of the suspension. I know for those that are Lions fans that maybe are first and now listeners and fans that the Moj is very opinionated on this conversation of thinking that Zach Collaros deserved to be suspended for, as they first announced, 2 games, got it reduced to 1 game, where, in this case, he wouldn't be playing. I think Moj is definitely a little bit homerish in that take, which is totally fine, right? He's, employed by the BC Lions, calling games in a very good fashion. Very big fan of Moj and how he keeps it real and raw and really, like I mentioned, just really real, authentic. So when talking about Zach Collaros, I'm interested to see kind of, how he looks. First glimpse we're going to see of Zach Collaros since the Grey Cup, returning to the same building that they struggled. I wouldn't want to say mightily, but they struggled for a majority of that football game, right? And whether you want to, talk about Zach's injury to his cut on his hand and maybe the lack of adaptability in terms of play calling and game plan is one thing, but I know Winnipeg media members and supporters, as I mentioned, of the Bombers feel like he's going to be a motivated one, like he's going to come out ready to go off the suspension, off the Grey Cup loss, especially watching his team last week win. I'm interested to see what Zach Collaros we see with. If I remind you folks, he did struggle for a majority of the regular season, got a little bit better in the playoffs, and obviously the Grey Cup was the Grey Cup, but it'll be interesting to see how Zach Collaros returns to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers starting a lineup. I think next and most importantly, before we get into some of the matchups here, will be a little bit of a shorter preview this week, folks, with not the guests, but of course, saying that now, I'm sure by the time we're 45, 50 minutes in, I'm going to want to keep yapping away here, and it'll turn into an hour show before we know it. So, kind of the last thing, as I mentioned in initial thoughts, just the BC Lions, I thought got whooped up front on last Thursday night, and was a tough one, right? I think going into the off season was a lot of was on a high. It was kind of the highest priority of the BC Lions was trying to fix that. On both sides. One, obviously, with kind of the Matthew Betson having to make sure gets brought back, but kind of wanting to make sure that he has his kind of somebody to ride shotgun with him. Him being Batman, somebody he needs a Robin, right? And I think they're still kind of trying to look for that. Kameka Toure has shown flashes. I believe he has 2 sacks in 2 games, which is a good thing, right? He's showing up on the stat sheet. But that being said, he still does go a lot of the game kind of unheard of. So, we'll take your goods with the bads. Uh, that being said, speaking of suspensions, Siona Tama will be back in the BC Lions lineup, most likely coming back off suspension. So that will hopefully be an added boost when talking about winning the battle at the line of scrimmage. But when talking about, you knew that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were going to try to come in here, start the season the way that they finished the last multiple seasons, running the rock, establishing that line of scrimmage, and they did so running the football on the first possession of the game. Brady Oliveira, 2 carries, 49 yards. When he went down, Matthew Peterson, the rookie running back, steps in, and he picks up right where Brady left off, and then some, right? He finishes the game 23 carries, 130 rushing yards. A great showing, for a phenomenal showing for the rookie, right? I would really hope that there's a lot of um, competitors in that locker room, and I know there is a lot of competitors in that BC Lions locker room, but guys that have some pride with them, and not a slight, or I don't want this to sound like I'm kind of taking a shot at Matthew Peterson here, but I would. And not that the fact that he's a Canadian, it's more so that he's a rookie, right? They let a rookie come in here and kind of run the ball the way he did and have some success the way he did. I would think that they're going to be very motivated to try to limit him as best as possible on Saturday and try to make sure that he's as quiet as possible, with knowing that Brady Oliveira is not going to be in the lineup. Would be curious to see if he's maybe on the sideline or if he even makes the trip at all. But got to take advantage of Brady Oliveira not being in the lineup, and kind of hoping that maybe this kid was, this is kind of his one game as a rookie that he kind of started out fast, and he's gonna kind of go through his rookie season of ebbs and flows, ups and downs, peaks and valleys of he's gonna learn by doing so on the fly, which is a good thing I think for Matthew Peterson, right? With this next little bit, we'll see how long Brady Oliveira is out. I know he was at practice a little bit with DB Darren Bombing, um, taking some videos of him doing with some PTs, some trainers off to the side. So his rehab looks to be going pretty smoothly so far, although early, right? And no contact quite yet. We'll see how things go with Brady. I would imagine they wouldn't want to try to rush him back too fast, especially with how Matthew looked. And if he's able to have some more success, even more kudos and can't do anything more but just tip your cap to Matthew Peterson, especially us here being, fans of Matthew, having him on the podcast in the past. So yeah, it'd be an interesting one that I think is a must win when it comes to for the BC Lions winning the battle at the line of scrimmage. So let's get into the injury reports this week and not kind of get all over the place, and let's talk about the most important first, which is obviously the status of Nathan Rourke, BC Lions quarterback who left last week's game with a core injury, a oblique injury, which I guess they're going to be calling a oblique strain. So Nathan Rourke ends up leaving the game versus Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the fourth quarter with an oblique injury, and is a tough one. I mentioned on Twitter of it's a good thing that it's kind of a mini bye for the BC Lions here coming up. That being said, it's going to be a tough one for a quarterback with that area of the injury, and I think how much it will impact, and not even impact it in ways, definitely impact his throwing mechanics and stuff like that. But just I feel like linger and be uncomfortable for Nathan when it comes to the throwing motion of a quarterback. I think this was the right decision by the BC Lions in terms of I know he's hopeful right now, listed on the BC Lions injury report, but when you look at it realistically, I think it's a little bit more gamesmanship going on here more than anything else, especially when you look at Buck Pierce coming over from the Michael O'Shea regime. You look at Nathan Rourke's 3 days of practice this week and look at, limited DNP. I would, kind of lean towards him not going this week, Masoli getting all the first team reps. And like I said, I think it's the right decision to do. Rest him, especially when you look at the upcoming schedule, right? Absolutely, is it a bummer to potentially lose the season series to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers without your starting quarterback? For sure. As I mentioned, how tight the West Division will be this year, playoff implications, stuff like that. You want to be at your best in games like this against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers team, especially coming off a loss. But that being said, when looking at the schedule ahead, right? When looking at the BC Lions being on the road for the next upcoming 3 weeks, when going on the road to Saskatchewan, to Montreal, to Edmonton, and then at home versus Saskatchewan, a tough month of the season coming up, right? Where the Lions are going to have to win. I would say at least at bare minimum go 500 and go 2-2 over the next 4 games, just to kind of stay afloat and make sure that you're hanging around, right? With Calgary still undefeated, Winnipeg looks to be right within the thick of things now. Saskatchewan being the number one team, I think, on paper still and showing on the field. Although I know people are wanting to see more from Saskatchewan, I think they're handling their business with some of the injuries they've been dealt with and stuff like that. And I think more better football is to come for Saskatchewan. The BC Lions, I think, at least got a split with maybe they take that Edmonton game. I don't think it's a maybe. They definitely played that Edmonton game and got to find a way to steal one of those Saskatchewan games. If not, the Montreal game would be ideal. Having Nathan Rourke for that stretch run, I think, is super important when it comes to rushing back for this week to try to split with the Bombers. I feel like is a little bit irresponsible when looking at the bigger picture of a longer season. When, as I mentioned, just trying to hang around, just try to hang around till Labor Day, right? Stay in the playoff picture. Don't totally sink your season before Labor Day. you can get to Labor Day and you're 1 or 2 games back of a playoff seed, or you're in a playoff seed by 1 or 2 games, I think you're in, great condition. Excuse me, I shouldn't say great condition. You're in good condition to, be in the playoffs. And once you get a playoff ticket, that's all that matters, right? Is getting your ticket to the dance. And, you know, we've seen it in the past of, 1, 2, and 3 seeds, not always the first seed winning the Grey Cup in the past history. So it'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of, I would imagine they're going to, work out Nathan Work pregame, see how he's feeling, ride the whole questionable status out. They did not rule him as out in the Thursday injury report listing. It'll be interesting to see what happens maybe tomorrow or Saturday morning if things change and they totally just rule him out. I would imagine they're going to maybe want to see how he feels on game day and maybe go from there. And as I said, I think the right decision is to rest him and let him, take the week off, get him healthy, and get him right for this stretch run of Saskatchewan, Montreal, Edmonton, Saskatchewan again is most important. So when talking about, I think the matchups now is what we'll get into here in a second, folks, and we'll get into the BC Lions offense first. That right there is why I need Blake back in the saddle. For when I need drink breaks, because for those people that podcast or know that talk maybe for a living or for a hobby, when you get going and your mouth gets dry, it's like, man, I need some agua. I need something to drink to get my throat feeling better again. And my throat was getting dry there for a second. Get a little Gatorade, splash of Gatorade, and we're good to go. So let's get into the matchup of the BC Lions offense versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense this week, which looks to be led by CFL veteran quarterback Jeremiah Masoli, brought over in the offseason as a free agent addition, brought into the quarterback room alongside Chase Bryce. Chase Bryce entering year number 3 with the BC Lions, picked up as a veteran free agent, and was, I think, treated as a true open competition coming into the offseason and into training camp by the BC Lions. I think that they were, I don't know if I want to say underwhelmed. I don't know if I want to go to quite that extent of underwhelmed. I think that they would have maybe liked to see a little more in Jeremiah Masoli's action in the preseason, more specifically down in Victoria. I know he threw the touchdown pass, but wasn't as crisp as maybe you would have liked to see. Chase Bryce, I think, was even more of that, although I know he finished with good numbers, especially in that first preseason game down in Victoria as well. But to me, it didn't feel like he was very comfortable when watching with when we talk about kind of the eye test versus watching with stat padding or stat watching kind of thing, and I just felt that he was very, now whether this is on him 100% or not, I think is definitely another conversation in terms of the protection that was around him. He just didn't feel comfortable in rhythm down in Victoria. In Edmonton, it was kind of more of the same thing. And obviously, when you're dealing with some of the backup linemen and stuff like that, and it's kind of a different task for sure. But it wasn't really kind of, after that, wasn't really clarified in terms of, Farhanology reported that he thought it was still in question whether or not who was going to be the backup quarterback. It wasn't just going to be given to Jeremiah Masoli coming out of training camp. And Chase Bryce, I believe, was listed as the number 2 last week. And when Nathan Rourke left the game, Jeremiah Masoli comes in. Now that Nathan Rourke doesn't look like he's playing this week, it looks like they're going to go to the veteran in Jeremiah Masoli, who's played in this league, who's done stuff in this league, and I personally like the call a little bit better than Chase Bryce. I question whether or not Jeremiah Masoli is good enough to lead us to victory. But that being said, I feel like of the two, he's able to, lean on his experience the most and be able to give us the best shot at victory in week number 3. So when talking about the offense, I think talking about a backup quarterback, when talking about, I feel like maybe not the stigma, but Winnipeg Blue Bombers have just had the BC Lions number over the last few seasons. If we're calling a spade, I think the best kind of way to help out a backup quarterback and the best way to maybe set the tone, I guess, in this game is to run the football and try to be effective as possible because obviously you can, pound the table of let's run the football, right? And that's all fine and dandy, right? But I think we saw a little bit last week of the BC Lions wanting to run the football with James Butler and stuff like that, but not having much success, right? And when you play in a 2 down league and you're only running for 1 or 2 yards on first down and you're in second and long and second and 7 and second and 8, right? You're you're not as motivated or not as tempted to keep running the ball on first down, right? So you're leaning away, you're kind of going away from it on first down. You're deciding to pass the ball a little bit more, rightfully so, right? With not the run game not having success. So you kind of just based on game script and how the flow of the game is going, you kind of almost take yourself out of the run game a little bit, right? And I think if you're able to have some success early on, you're able to continue to lean on it, you're able to continue to weaponize it. And I think that's going to be an important factor for the BC Lions on Saturday and getting James Butler back involved once again. As I mentioned in week number 1 post game show, I mentioned of, James Butler is going to see double of the touches that he saw in week 1, which I believe was 13. I would love if these were one of the games where we saw 25 touches from James Butler, where not only give him the ball coming out of the backfield, but get him involved through the air, right? Throwing the ball out of the backfield, get him involved in the screen game, stuff like that. I also think if it's possible with obviously, you know, 2 down game, you only have so many downs to run the football and have another tailback out there. But Xander Horvath, I would love to see a little bit of a sprinkle of Horvath involved in the offense, see what he's able to do in, a few carries, workload. If you're able to kind of work that into the game and into the flow of it, as I mentioned, if you're kind of letting a guy like James Butler cook and he's having some success, it's a little bit of a tougher task to do. But I would like to see how that would work, especially I think if it's kind of the recipe to victory running the football. I think you're able to get around maybe 30 carries or something like that, and kind of the sweet spot maybe is kind of 20 carries for JB and maybe about 10 carries for Horvath. Something like that would be, I think, perfect for the BC Lions to control the clock as well, which would be the big factor in terms of time of possession, winning time of possession, keeping the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in that offense, Zach Collaros on the sideline while you continue to run the ball, move the chains, and hopefully punch it in the end zone at the end of the drive. So the other thing that I would love to see the BC Lions do once again that I thought they did a good job in the preseason as well as week number 1 versus Edmonton is the attack of the threat of going east-west in the jet sweep game, in some of the play action passes coming out of the backfield, with guys coming out of the backfield, some of the bootlegs that were splitting the field in half, giving the quarterbacks easy reads, which I think will help a guy like Jeremiah Masoli as well. And I think is going to be important this week in terms of slowing up that pass rush from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Willie Jefferson leading the charge there, but just being able to slow down the pass rush in terms of not being able to pin their ears back. The threat of going east-west makes them think that split second if they're kind of, blowing up field or whatnot, and they have to, they're kind of ignoring the responsibility of contain and stuff like that, and jet sweep pass, kind of which the Lions have kind of adopted in the preseason in week 1, as I mentioned, the little flip pass going forward, which you know it kind of looks like a handoff, but it goes down as a pass going forward because Nathan Work is whether you want to call it a handoff, a flip pass in front of him, it's in front of him, so it goes down as a pass on the stat sheet. I think is a great weapon in terms of slowing up that pass rush on defense. And when looking at Stanley Berryhill being injured, out for the game with, I believe, um, didn't talk about the injury report, or we didn't finish talking about the injury report, which we should have when we finish in a second with a thigh injury. Stanley Barreld out. Jermaine Jackson, who was out, or I guess left last week's game in warm-ups with injury, is back in the lineup, going to start at the boundary receiver, what looks to be. I think you got to utilize him in that east-west threat and weaponize him as a threat for your offense. I would love to see Buck Pierce in you utilize Jackson in that fashion. So we will see when game day comes. And last but not least, when talking about the offense, of course, is don't let Willie Jefferson ruin the game. Willie Jefferson, I think, is there's I don't want this to sound like there's not a lot of great players, because there is a lot of great players in the CFL, especially on defense. But I feel like Willie Jefferson is truly one of the few or only game wreckers truly in the defense in on defense in the CFL when it comes to wrecking a game plan, wrecking a game for opposing offenses. For Willie Jefferson, not only being a pain when getting to the quarterback, batting down passes, being able to be effective in the run game as well, being able to be, just all over the field, line up in multiple different positions as well. So don't let Willie ruin the game. I think is probably kind of Captain Obvious here, but as Willie gets older, he kind of ages like fine wine. He's not slowing down, folks. He continues to play at a high level. We saw it a little bit last week, him and flashing and batting down rush passes at times, and continues to play at a high level as he continues to age. And um, keep an eye on number 5 and where he lines up for sure on Saturday. So let's talk about the BC Lions defense versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers offense, once again led by their man Zach Collaros back under center. Number 8. I know there's a lot of Winnipeg Blue Bombers fans that are happy. I know selfishly for myself being in the building, I will be excited to watch Zach operate once again. I'm a fan of Zach Collaros. I'm a fan of high-level quarterbacking play, and that's what he can do in the CFL at a high level. We've seen him do it for years. That being said, last year he definitely was. There were some questions of, what kind of, it was a tougher year for him. But I think I kind of I related to a little bit more of Bo Levi Mitchell's maybe struggles in Calgary, coming over to Hamilton, finding a little bit more success of, just maybe kind of needing a little bit of a fresh start. And I don't think Zach needed necessarily a fresh start, but just kind of needed, to go into an offseason, have a breather, and kind of just hit the ground running. And obviously now it'll be interesting to go through, because he's not necessarily hit the ground running, right? He's going through all these suspension issues now, and something to keep an eye on will be, I think, how does Zach Claros respond on the field? Does he come out looking like Zach Claros of last year, which will be a good thing for the BC Lions and that defense? Or does he come out looking like Zach Claros in his prime? And you know, I think that'll be a big time problem if he does come out slinging the ball and he's looking like his old self. So will be something to monitor for sure. But when talking about the BC Lions defense, you know, probably the scary part is that I think BC Lions fans, I think the BC Lions staff, I think the BC Lions players, they know what's coming, and then it comes down to a matter of can they stop it, right? When talking about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, what do the Winnipeg Blue Bombers do? They run the rock. They have a great offensive line that opens up holes in the run game. They give Zach Collaros or whatever quarterback time in the pass game to go through their reads and deliver the ball downfield. The scary part is now that obviously Brady Oliveira's not there last week. Matthew Peterson steps up. They don't miss a beat. Can Matthew Peterson do it again as a rookie? It will be one thing to monitor as well. But as I mentioned, when talking about an offensive line that is able to help out a rookie in the run game and opening up holes and stuff like that, can the BC Lions stop the Winnipeg Blue Bombers offensively when knowing what's coming at them? It'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. That can you stop the Winnipeg Blue Bombers when they're running the ball straight downhill? They're coming at you, and they're just wanting to play smash mouth football on first down. Will be an interesting one, because then when playing smash mouth football on first down, and they're popping off 4 or 5 yards to carry. Zach Collaros in second and manageable is going to be lights out, right? Chris Shelley last week was lights out in second and manageable, right? And the other thing that is coming is can you can you stop Nick Dembski and Dalton Schoen down the field? The threat of them getting down the field. Not only can you stop them getting down the field, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers get them involved in the passes around the line of scrimmage and letting them create in terms of yak yardage after the catch, right? Getting them in those quick tunnel screens, those quick smoke screens, and letting Schoen and Dembski pick up the yards after the catch, I think is one thing. You saw them get behind coverage, Dembski more specifically a few times, right down the field. Dembski on the over route, Dembski on the post for the touchdown. Another one, which I was very vocal and quick to be on my high horse of Gary Peters, and man, he's still not just because he had a tough half or a tough game, still arguably the best corner, arguably the best boundary defensive back in the entire CFL. Still, we fall ate his lunch last week, and I think he really needs to have a bounce back game in terms of Gary Peters' bounce back game, which is crazy when thinking he had an interception in the game. If he's being honest, and I know he is because he's the true professional that he is. You know, we've all looked very impressive in multiple matchups for some picking up multiple big plays on Gary Peters. I think Gary Peters is going to need to do a better job against Weefall, against Seclaricius, whoever's going to be able to line up over him. I think Gary Peters and that defensive back core would do the team and Jeremiah Masoli wonders in terms of being able to create a turnover or two. Two would probably be ideal or preferred. But it'll be an interesting one, right? In terms of, as I mentioned, no Brady Oliveira. I don't think that matters for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers or Jason Hogan. They're going to line up. They're going to run the ball downhill. They're going to play smash mouth football and run at you regardless of whether you care or not. Then they're going to set up that play action with Zach Collaros and getting the ball downfield to Nick Dembski, Dalton Schoen, Wheatball, Seclaricius, as I mentioned. Can the BC Lions stop it? Can they kind of, put their foot in the ground and say, you know what? No, we're going to kind of stick our nose in the dirt here. We're going to stick our nose into things and kind of man up. And I would love to see it because I think it would be a true statement on defense in terms of the BC Lions being able to be up to the task when asked to stop the run. And it's going to be one thing when it comes to winter weather or prairie weather, whatever you want to call it, playoff football, I guess. Playoff condition is what we'll call it in Canadian football in October or November. It's obviously somewhat similar, but completely different in terms of a stadium, right? They're going to be able to run the football if they want to and if they have success all darn day on a clean track, no slipping, field is mint, indoors. Having those conditions are obviously ideal, right? And will only enhance and help them being able to run the football. So it'll be an interesting one. I think for the BC Lions, priority number one is obviously stopping uh, the run. Priority 1B would be getting pressure on Zach Collaros. Last week was somewhat non-existent. I believe Quebec Toure finished with a sack. There was some pressure at times on Chris Shudler, but for a majority of the time, Chris Shudler was going through his reads, going through the pocket relatively clean and relatively untouched. So getting some pressure on Zach Collaros, I think, is priority, kind of that 1B, number two priority kind of area in terms of it as well. When you look at a guy like Sione Chihama coming off suspension, being in the rotation, I would imagine, probably not being in the starting lineup. I would think they're going to continue to start Quebec Toure opposite of Matthew Betts. Let Tihema maybe get a game or two under his belt before throwing him out there for starting reps. Because as I said, Quebec Toure has shown some flashes. I think being need to be a little bit more consistent. But you could argue that Sione Tama could probably be a little bit more consistent as well. I think the one thing about Sione that that you're going to maybe get is that he plays with a high motor. You're going to get that effort from Sione as well in the run game and stuff like that as well. So The matchups, folks, not wanting to kind of gonna be a quick preview, and as I mentioned, not wanting to spend too much time on it. We know what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are gonna come at us with, right? Of that physical smash mouth football. We saw it last week. Can the BC Lions stop it? I think offensively, it's gonna be an interesting one to see how the BC Lions attack the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defensively, because I think there's holes that they're able to, hopefully try to exploit and take advantage of to, stay on the field and put up points and hang around in this game. I think if they're able to hang around and stay in the game into the fourth quarter, it's anybody's ball game, late in the fourth quarter in the CFL game. So hang around, see what happens. But these two teams played last week. I think they're going to know what to expect. Obviously, with a little bit more film and the BC Lions maybe having a better idea of what a Jason Hogan led offense is going to look like. Things are kind of going to be, roll the balls out, let's play football. Both teams are, I feel like, prepared as much as they could be for this matchup of how both teams like to play. So, before we get into the three keys, let me actually finish the injury report because I did skip over a few things that I feel like important when talking about the BC Lions. So, the BC Lions, when talking about the, let's maybe start from the top of the injury report when talking about the linebacker position, and are going to have some decisions to make here now coming up in the not near future now of when talking about depth charts will be released when I'm recording this tomorrow, by the time you guys are listening to this today. And it'll be interesting because when you look at the injury report, Josh Woods available, although listed as a defensive lineman. I didn't know Josh Woods made the transition to defensive line. I wish I knew. And then Adam Auclair, Canadian linebacker, listed as available as well. Auclair dealing with a shoulder injury, missed a majority of training camp, and then Josh Woods obviously coming back from his torn ACL last season. A welcomed addition in the linebacker room for both of them. I think Adam Auclair will serve a purpose on special teams and be an impact, hopefully, right away. And hopefully, we notice him because special teams has definitely been leaky through the first 2 weeks in terms of the coverage teams and stuff like that. And then Josh Woods, does he get right back into the starting lineup in terms of, does he kind of come in at Mike and Mike always moves over to Will, or does Mike always stay at Mike and Josh Woods comes in at Will, or what may happen in terms of the linebacker rotation there, and when Josh Woods looks comfortable enough to get back into the starting lineup, but listed as full and available both Josh Woods and Adam Auclair, the linebackers. So as I mentioned, Stanley Berryhill out this week with a thigh injury, which he suffered in practice. Was a full participant Tuesday, limited Wednesday, and then a DNP on Thursday. So obviously got tighter and tighter throughout the week and shut him down for this week. I'd imagine a little bit precautionary, more so precautionary. We saw him in some BC Lions content and looked to be in pretty good spirits, looked to be pretty upbeat as Stanley Berryhill is. And I would think he's going to be able to kind of return in the next few weeks, although you never know with some of those things and kind of receivers, right, in that position of something so small of that thigh tweak or strain, whatever it may be, can kind of flare up, and come back in an instance or in kind of one route, one rep, practice in a game, etc. Other than that, as I said, Jermaine Jackson, full and is available. I would imagine he's going to start in Stanley Berryhill's place. When talking about the linebacker position, actually, Jeremy Lewis, DNP 3 days in a row with a foot injury. He is out, backup middle linebacker for Micah Awe through the first 2 weeks. I would imagine that's where likely Josh Woods probably slots in his first game action this season as a backup Mike for Micah Awe this game. Maybe get a little bit of burn on special teams, see how that would look. And then going down the injury report, I'm curious to see a guy like Marcus Moore, load management, full, coming off the concussion that he suffered down in Victoria in the first preseason game versus Calgary. Was a weird one, a weird case for Marcus Moore of, I believe went back into the game in Calgary, got his helmet knocked off during a play, finished the play, He said he got poked in the eye, went back up to Kamloops, did some media with, First and Now and was chatting about it, right? And went through the protocol and stuff like that, was feeling good, and then ended up back in the concussion protocol a few days later, not feeling totally himself, and missed the first 2 weeks of the season, and now back with the load management and available for the game. I'm curious how they're able to balance, obviously, with ratio implications and roster management, if they're able to bring him back and activate him into the starting, not even to the starting lineup, but just on active on game day, or they have to go with other options as well. When you look at a guy like Jonah Tavai, who's played fabulous through 2 games, Dwayne Hendricks having some flashes as well, playing some pretty good snaps, cemented as your two starters in the interior. I think when you look at Christian Covington as a rotational piece, he's locked in as well. And then with guys like Thibaut Tobaye, Nathan Cherino is getting some rotation in there as well. You're kind of set in that middle of the defense already. But where does Marcus Moore maybe slot in with having a very good training camp, preseason in the limited action he was able to play in down in Victoria? That being said, though, is available and will be something to monitor if he's able to be active on game day. Gary Peters was the other one, limited for the first 2 days of practice on Tuesday, Wednesday, the thigh injury, and then full today or yesterday by the time you guys are listening to this, but is available and ready for the game. I would imagine, those veterans, when they're limited, kind of more so for precautionary, more so than anything else. Of course, sometimes it's a little bit different, but stuff like that, especially with a veteran like Gary Peters, who's been around, especially in that defense, not really needing to kind of, be a full participant in practice and getting guys some other reps just in case something does happen in a game and goes down and they're able to be a little bit more comfortable because they took those reps. And then obviously depth receiver Kieran Persant, DNP 3 straight days with a thigh injury as well. The thigh injuries have been very popular apparently, with some thigh strains and tweaks throughout the Lions locker room. Kieran Persant, obviously depth receiver, active on game day, rotational special teams player, will be, someone will have to fill those snaps as well. Could that be a guy like Josh Woods on defense? Something to monitor, as I mentioned. And then Anaiuna, as he was last week, available. Will he slot back into his projected starting position at right guard? Something to monitor as well. So lastly, I think let's get into my 3 keys of the game, and then we will get out of here for the night. And by the time you guys listen to this, by the time this is uploaded, Friday morning, the day before we finish off Friday, I have some awesome plans planned with some friends of mine. I think the day will go by pretty fast. We wake up Saturday, it's game day, and I cannot wait to be back in BC Place, taking in some great CFL action, watching the BC Lions take on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the rematch in an early season clash in the West Division. So my 3 keys to the game for the BC Lions in week number 3 versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Number 1 key is to take it to them. Set the tone early on, be the more physical team, set the kind of, as I mentioned with the set the tone, make sure you're kind of as I said with the physicality, taking it to them in the run game with finishing your blocks if you're the offensive line. If you're on special teams, maybe making a big hit, or maybe if you're a receiver, finishing your block, right? Your sideline is going to be able to see those blocks, right? If you're finishing your DB into the ground, springing your running back for more yardage down the field defensively, not letting the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have some success running the football, being able to create some, negative plays in terms of tackles for losses, sacks, hopefully, maybe some, turning the ball over could be another key. But I'm talking about key number 2. I've talked about it a few times when talking about a backup quarterback that you're going to be operating most likely with Jeremiah Masoli. Pound the rock if you're the BC Lions. Control the time of possession. hopefully you're able to have some success because that is the key to pounding the rock. If you're pounding the rock and you're not chipping away at that rock, you're kind of probably going to tire yourself out before you tire your opponent out. So with pounding the rock, you need to have some success. You got to have those 4 or 5 yards to set up those 10 to 11, 12-yard runs that are going to feel even better. And then lastly, steal a possession or two, I think is the key to the game here. The BC Lions weren't able to do so last week. If they're able to steal a possession or two when it comes to, force a fumble, intercept the ball, get a turnover of downs on third down or something like that, stealing a possession or two, as I said, with kind of alongside of owning the time of possession, running the football, takes a possession or two away from them, takes an opportunity, takes points away from them, I think will only help the BC Lions moving forward and getting a victory in this game. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing and maybe the biggest key of the BC Lions is even if it's ugly, even if it's 10 points the entire time, stay within that 2 scores. 14 is almost too much score a touchdown, you have to score a touchdown once again. I feel like in that 10-point range of being within 2 possessions, obviously 14 points is still 2 possessions as well. But being within a touchdown and a field goal, I feel like is that comfortable striking distance, especially in the CFL. Keep it within 10 points going into the fourth quarter for the BC Lions. And I feel like you're in a great position. You're right where you want to be in terms of with a backup quarterback at home. Try to win the ball game late, right? Try to get a possession, try to steal possession in terms of a turnover late. Maybe, it's a 3-point game with a few minutes to go and Mr. Automatic's going to be able to kick a field goal for you to tie, right? And um, as I said, keeping it within a 10, 11-ish, 10, 10 to 14 points range into the fourth quarter, I think is kind of ideal for the BC Lions this week when not being without their starting quarterback. But it'll be interesting one this week to kind of watch. I'm interested to be in the house and be there taking it in live because as much as I try to stay as I think even keel as I think the players do and the locker rooms do, just having experience played. This is a big one, right? And as much as you can kind of spin this positively in terms of 1 and 2 isn't a 6-foot grave that you're trying to dig yourself out of. Um, it's just not ideal in terms of I think how tight the Western Division is going to be. As of now, I think my predictions right were kind of that I thought it would be a 3-team race in terms of Saskatchewan, BC, Winnipeg in that order. As of now, through kind of seeing things through one game and maybe some early season overreactions, I would think right now Saskatchewan and Winnipeg are kind of in a class of their own, right? And I think Calgary's kind of on the edge in terms of wanting to prove that they're legitimate, legitimizing themselves, I guess, legitimizing their early 2-0 start in terms of being in that top echelon in the Western Division. I think for me personally, it's Winnipeg and Saskatchewan in a tier of their own, BC and Calgary in another tier in terms of fighting for that third and final playoff spot in the Western Division, and then Edmonton kind of by themselves at the bottom. BC just has to make sure that no catastrophic things happen in this game. Don't lose by 50. Don't lose their entire starting offensive line. Don't lose 4 or 5 guys to season-ending injuries. If you come out of this thing with a loss, you're 1-2. It's not the sky is falling. It's time to focus up. 7 days later, you're going to Saskatchewan, one of the best teams in the CFL this year, one of the best environments in the CFL. And you're going to have to handle business with or without Nathan Mark, right? And that's where things will definitely get interesting in terms of not wanting to fall to 1-3 because those are kind of holes that 1-3 will turn into 1-4, 1-5 very quickly. It'll snowball out of control before you know it, especially with falling to 1-3 and you're going to Montreal with 1-3 record. Not ideal. I think you lose to Winnipeg this uh, upcoming week. this Saturday, it's even more important to try to pick that win up in Saskatchewan, just so you don't fall to 1-3, and it's kind of you're going to Edmonton playing with fire, right? Don't let that team that's even more desperate than you potentially trying to get their first victory. You're going to their house, and as I said, playing with fire, don't want to get burnt. So, as I get to the 50-minute mark, and as I try to say, going to be a shorter episode. I'm going to try to wind it down, and I imagine I'll get to the 55-minute mark, and it'll basically be a episode as usual. What can I say, folks? I'm excited to be back in BC Place, capturing some content once again for the second week of this season. Going to be on a 3-week break before we're back in BC Place, though, with the BC Lions hitting the road for a majority of the next month. Next time we'll be back in BC Place after this will be July 19th for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. That'll be a fun game to be a part of. And after that, it's another pretty lengthy break before they're back in BC Place. I think it's basically until August, mid-August at some point, where we'll be back in BC Place. I'm excited. But when talking about content in BC Place and at the game tomorrow or at the game on Saturday, please, when talking about commenting down below, comment down below what you guys would like to see in terms of, some of the pregame content that I've been capturing. You guys can go see some of that stuff on our YouTube Shorts channels or tabs, I guess. And a ton of fun to be down there on the field pregame, field level, right up there with the players. We got some ideas this week. We're actually going to be having a friend uh, coming along with us this week in Hamish, who I worked with the Vancouver Island Raiders, creating content and doing some of their social media last season. Hamish also was a big reason why, and was the reason actually why I was able to kind of connect with Rogers TV and kind of land that gig as well. Hamish working for Rogers TV and kind of lives in uh, Whistler, works for that station up in Whistler, Rogers TV. So big shout out to Hamish. Hamish is going to give us a hand this week in terms of creating some content, giving us some cool ideas, and just wanted to kind of see if he was able to tag along. Matt Baker was gracious as always. Big shout out to Matt for being so cool and kind to us, for allowing us for all the access he does. This week should be a lot of fun and should be cool. I'm talking about the post-game show. Post-game show, we're going to try to do live from BC Place, which will be a ton of fun and will be something to monitor, though, and is a TBD. I think it's going to work out pretty nicely if things go accordingly, that the game will finish up around 7 o'clock. I think we're going to be able to have some access to the BC Lions players' media availabilities, and then hoping to go back upstairs to the press box and record a post game live for you guys, which will be a ton of fun. Just coming from the post game show or post game availability, as I said, and being able to give you guys some of the thoughts and live quotes from the field. And then I will make my way back home, probably about finishing up around 9 o'clock, 9:30 or so. 10:40 ferry back home. Get it home around 12:30. Call her a night. And then, folks, I am a fan of the Sunday slates until Sunday NFL footballs take back over. Next week, the CFL goes back to Sunday football, which I'm super excited about. When I wake up on Sundays, it is a bummer, actually, folks, to go on a little bit of a rant here, because I know I'm actually going to get to an hour with this rant. Usually on Sundays, we have flag football. The flag football season is over until the fall season, which is a bummer, especially when we choked away the championship, unfortunately, this season. Myself, not to brag, not to talk too much about myself, but taking home the offensive MVP. We actually had the MVP of the league as well in, yes, my name is Cole, but we also have another fellow teammate of mine, Cole Bertanen, take home the league MVP in, I believe he had like 11 interceptions, 9 receiving touchdowns or something like that. We choked, and I don't want to say that in kind of undermining the team that won, because they were a very good team and well deserving of winning. But it was an unfortunate one in terms of the talent level we had, and now we have to sit on that until the fall season. So, not to get too far off task because I want to wrap this thing up and get to bed. You know, can't wait for Sunday CFL slate to take back over because when waking up on Sunday, it's nice to rewatch the game. But then once you rewatch the game, it's kind of it's a long day. Obviously, you're going to be editing some videos and stuff like that, but it's nice. It's a little bit nicer, I feel like, when you have a game to watch later that Sunday afternoon and kind of chillax on the couch and just relax and enjoy your Sunday. So very excited for that. But that'll be the plan for Saturday, folks. Going to create some content once again, hoping to do a live post game show from the stadium. So stay tuned for that. But other than that, I think that's going to do it for myself. Hopefully, Blake is back with us next week or at some point. Let us know down below in the comments, folks. Should we fire Blake? Should we look for a new co-host for the previews and post-game shows? Joking aside, of course, Blake is my main man here, but it is getting a little bit tiresome of not having my co-host here beside me. But I know Blake is busy, so all good. He's actually not going to be at the game this Saturday either, as well. So Blake really missing out in all things CFL. So I know he's a busy guy though. Other than that, folks, of course, if you guys can like the video, comment down below what you guys are thinking in terms of the BC Lions this week. Maybe you guys are Winnipeg Blue Bombers fans, or you're just CFL fans in general. How you guys are feeling in terms of the slate of games that are being played. If you guys aren't following along on our Instagram and Twitter account, the kid is 7-1 in our weekly picks with our CFL weekly show featuring Shane, Coach, and Blake. I'm 7-1, sitting in first place. Blake in second at 6-2, and then Coach and Shane in that order. Ton of fun so far. I'm hoping to stay atop the picks after week number 3, and hoping the BC Lions pick up a victory in week number 3. So, lastly, if you guys can follow us on social media, of course, at Canadian Football Fanatics on Instagram and at underscore CF Fanatics on Twitter. So hope you guys enjoyed the BC Lions week number 3 preview, and we will catch you guys on the next one.